In episode 3, Rhaenyra buries both brothers together, but she has a bigger concern. Everybody is on high alert. Everybody assumes that this order came from King's Landing, and while it did, they're thinking that it probably came from Alicent or Otto Hightower. And that's when Rhaenys comes over to Rhaenyra and says Otto Hightower would never have allowed this. Rhaenys mentions how it's gotten to the point where people are going to forget about how this war even started, and then she goes through the litany of things that led to this point, like Luke dying, Daemon getting his eye taken from him. But her point is, it's getting to the point where none of it's really going to matter. That's when she tells Rhaenyra there is another way, and it's Alicent Hightower. Rhaenys knows that Alicent figures war is on the way, and she's going to want to stop it. Of course, you've got Rhaenyra, who thinks that Alicent is the Antichrist who took her throne from her. Rhaenyra is still upset about the fact that Alicent sent a raven's message she still hasn't even read yet. Because after what she did, but Rhaenys cuts her off and says, that's not her, that's the men who are around her. They seek the bloodshed. And when Rhaenyra says, well, she permitted it, Rhaenys says, just like you permitted the murder of a little boy in his bed. And while Rhaenyra knows that she didn't do that, and Rhaenys knows that she didn't do that, that's the perception, and that's Rhaenys' point. That while Rhaenyra thinks she knows, she might actually not. So she probably should go and find a way to talk to Alicent Hightower to stop this war before everybody ends up regretting the decision. And while Rhaenyra does understand Rhaenys' message, she still has no real interest in talking to the person who she feels like stole her throne from her. As for Alicent, she's at King's Landing and she's with the rest of the advisors of the king trying to figure out what their next move is now that the planned assassination didn't work out. That's when Alicent realizes just how little influence she currently has. For Criston Cole, it's his first day as the Hand to the King, and he doesn't really handle it well. He shows very little remorse for sending Eric to his death, and then he has what Alicent feels like is a very, very irresponsible idea that's going to cost even more lives. Aemon tells the group that the war might have already kicked off. The first fight between warring factions regarding the sides went down in the Riverlands between two houses, House Bracken and House Blackwoods. Now, both these houses have been at war for years. They've never really gotten along. It's like Hatfield and McCoy's, but they went to war based on which side chose which king or queen. And while some at the table don't think it's a big deal because these houses have never really gotten along, others feel like this is the first actual battle in the war for the throne. King Aegon himself gets especially excited when he finds out that the Brackens were the ones who were successful in this battle because they support him. But Tywin Lannister points out, both sides suffered heavy losses. I don't know if we can consider anything a win. Because many at the table think that what they should have done is gotten both of those sides united, working for Aegon, not fighting amongst themselves. As they discuss exactly how they're going to take the Riverlands, that's when Sir Criston Cole speaks up and he says, Harrenhal is the key to taking the Riverlands. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a bunch of guys here that I know, that I've trained, that I can trust. I'll turn all the houses that declared for Rhaenyra to our cause. We'll add them to our own. Then we'll turn west. I'll enlist the Brackens. We'll subdue the Riverlands. And then we'll take Harrenhal. For Alicent, she feels like this is completely irresponsible because she doesn't think Criston Cole has enough time to do any of this. He's just rushing into this idea. He hasn't really planned out for any of it. But when she pushes back, Aegon disagrees with her. So much so that he's planning on joining Criston Cole with a dragon that he owns named Sunfire. But nobody likes that idea, including Criston Cole. He doesn't want to draw any attention, but Aegon asks him, what are your plans to do if you encounter a dragon? And Criston Cole feels like they're more likely to encounter a dragon if they bring one of their own. While the entire table pushes back on the idea that Aegon should do this, Aegon, who is really insecure, decides, no, I need to prove myself. I'm going. The next day, Criston Cole grabs his men, all the ones that he can gather. He, however, is getting a couple more people that he wasn't expecting on this journey, and that is Alicent's brother, Gwan. The initial interaction between Gwan and Criston is really awkward because Gwen is not happy with the fact that his father, who served 3 kings, was fired for this guy who has no experience whatsoever, and he has no problem making that known. And because of that, Kristen doesn't want to bring him along, but Alicent insists. So Kristen's stuck with Alicent's brother on this mission that Alicent doesn't agree with. Kristen knowing full well that all of this is basically just to keep an eye on him. And while Aegon was planning on going, he's actually talked out of it by Lord Larys, who pulls him aside and says, yes, the idea that you are brave and you're going into battle, a lot of people are saying that, but there's also people that are saying that you were outsmarted by your counselors, and all of this is so Alicent can really rule in your absence. And that's enough for Aegon to stick around and not go off to war. He decides instead to go off to the brothel with a guy who's a virgin and finally get him laid. What he finds, though, is Aemond laying with the hooker that he lost his virginity to, and that's when Aegon just starts mocking him relentlessly about the fact that he hasn't moved on from the girl that he lost his virginity to. It's really embarrassing for Aemond, but he just gets up and walks out. Over at Casterly Rock, Rhaenyra has to thank one person for the fact that she's still there, and that's Mysaria. She came back and she warned everybody about what she saw. She felt like she kind of owed it to Rhaenyra after Rhaenyra decided to let her go when she didn't have to. And after thanking her, she goes and meets with Rhaena. After the attack on herself, she can't risk her children dying. If they can get to her, they can certainly get to the kids. So she decided to send her youngest children off to safety until this war is over. She's sending them off to her cousin, Lady Jane Eyre, and she's promised an army in return for a dragon, and she wants Rhaena to go with them. And for Rhaena, she doesn't want to do this. She doesn't want to be a glorified babysitter. She feels like nobody respects her, not like they respect Baela. And this is kind of further proof of that. After giving Rhaena the bad news, she then goes and meets with her council, because just like with King Aegon and Alicent and that group, she needs to figure out her next move. One of the issues is no one has heard from Daemon. No one knows where Daemon is. No one knows if Daemon's been able to secure Harrenhal. So for the time being, they have to act like he hasn't done anything. Some of her council just want to take the dragons and go scorched earth. That's how you win the battle, but Rhaenyra doesn't want to do that. For her, she wants to win this war with armies, not dragons, because you start fighting with dragons and dragons end up dying, and it's a no-win situation for anybody. A couple other members of her council point to the fact that now she's pretty exposed, Daemon's nowhere to be found. Maybe she should just go on hiding and, they'll run things while she's away, but man, she really hates that idea. No, the only thing they agree upon is giving Daemon more time to gather an army. After this very, very contentious meeting, Rhaenys goes and meets with her husband by the sea, and she gives him the update on everything that just went down in that shit show. The conversation then turns to Rhaena, who's about to leave that day and who Rhaenys said goodbye to. Rhaenys proposes that they make Rhaena the heir to Driftmark, which Lord Corlys just kind of laughs at. It doesn't seem like Corlys is really interested in naming any heir to Driftmark, but that's when Rhaenys points out, we are at war, I could lose you at any moment. All he says, though, is, well, it's a good thing I'm a good sailor. As for Rhaena, she's back at the castle, she's putting on a strong face, but Baela knows that she's not happy about it. As Baela's trying to make Rhaena feel better about the situation, they walk over to Rhaenyra, and she shows them another thing that Rhaena will be accompanying on this trip. It's dragon eggs. Rhaenyra didn't feel comfortable having, quote, all her eggs in one basket, quite literally and figuratively, so she's spreading them out a little bit. She knew with war on the horizon, she needed to keep the future in mind, and by sending these dragon eggs away, she's doing that. Rhaenyra then says goodbye to her kids, Rhaena says goodbye to her sister, and everybody takes off. And that night, an emotional Rhaenyra finally opens Alicent's letter. The next day, though, she gets really bad news. As Baela was doing her job by just scouting the area for anything that looked abnormal, she came across Sir Criston Cole's group. Right away, she recognized that's Sir Criston Cole. And she had no idea what they were doing, but she knew it wasn't good. Now, with concrete proof that people from King's Landing are marching to gather an army, a lot of Rhaenyra's council is urging her to do something. They urge her because they know that Cole's group is headed to Harrenhal, and if he gathers an army and then he calls a dragon on his own, Daemon, if he's even at Harrenhal, is in danger. But even though they urge her to do something, the thing she does is go and see Mysaria and say, what do you know about Alicent Hightower's movements? because I need to speak with her. Massaria, who was able to get Daemon snuck into King's Landing, tells her that the way to get in without being noticed is to dress up like a septa. And the next day, Rhaenyra does just that. She dresses like a septa, she's able to get into King's Landing, and she meets with Alicent as she's praying. Now, Alicent is totally shocked that Rhaenyra is there, and Rhaenyra explains, I'm here because we are the only two people that can stop this war from happening. This, though, starts a petty squabble between the two, where at first they argue about what the other did. Alicent thinking Rhaenyra sent the killers. Rhaenyra thinking that Alicent might have had something to do with the hit on her. But then the argument goes to the throne and how Rhaenyra feels like Alicent stole it from her. She remembers her father saying that she was the rightful heir, and then at the very last minute, Alicent had a conversation with her dad, and suddenly he changed his mind. And Alicent says, yes, he did. He actually changed his mind. She looks Rhaenyra dead in the eye and says, I swear, on the memory of my mother, I proclaimed to an entire room that you would make a good queen. But then I walked in that room, and your father, who was very weary, spoke Aegon's name and said that Aegon was the prince that was promised. When Rhaenyra hears that, she's floored. She now realizes that, yeah, her dad actually did change his mind, because how in the world would Alicent even know that? It must be true. And while it hurts, she still wants to stop this bloodshed. Unfortunately, what she doesn't realize is that Alicent doesn't really have the pull that she used to. So even though both women do want to stop this war from happening, and they do think that it's stupid, Alicent can't really help Rhaenyra in this situation. She just shakes her head at Rhaenyra and says, it's too late. All is not lost for Rhaenyra, though. Daemon did arrive at Harrenhal, and while he expected to get some resistance, he got zero of it. He was met by Simon Strong, who welcomed him with open arms, because he has no allegiance to anybody. So yeah, okay, fine, I'll join Rhaenyra's side, no problem. I don't really want to fight. That night, though, the weirdest thing happened. Daemon started having a hallucination. At first, he went around the castle looking to find who was trying to get in his room, and that's when he came across a teenage Rhaenyra holding the slain Jaehaerys' body. When he snaps out of it, he's in front of the Wayward Tree, where Elise River tells him, Daemon, you're going to die here. So that's a bit of a buzzkill. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry, it'll be up in a day or two.